Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the messy middle of being out on your own and starting over with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. Hello, lovely listener. Thank you for joining me for this, this big bumper transformational story of starting over and building a career that is meant just for you. This is a conversation that just fills me with joy and so many feelings because we get to talk about life and business integrated into a lesson of learning, unlearning, growing, and serving humans to be in their own personal power by the work that they do on themselves and in the world. I mean, how's that for a mouthful? But it just gets me right in the feels because I so intensely believe that work is not about selling your time for something, then becoming who you are in the hours not sold. I think integration of your truest, higher self into the work that you do empowers both you and others to find their own place in the world and be the best version of themselves. That's the purpose of these conversations, that weekly reminder that you can and should grow through the work that you do. And by nature of growing, tweak and change and stuff up and learn as often as needed to keep growing into the most vibrant version of yourself. Anyway, I'm ranting. Perhaps I'm just feeling especially excited as I've taken yet another change in my own journey. I left the security of full-time work, again, to be back on my own, fully invested into creating work that nourishes me and creating this podcast and these stories for you. So that's good news for you, hopefully, as it means plenty more unemployed and afraid goodness on the horizon. So if you are happy about that, then maybe put us on your to-do list and leave that hopefully glowing review you've been meaning to leave. Follow on Insta and give the show some love. Okay, shut up, Kim, because this really is already one very big conversation. This conversation is with a woman that's been at the forefront of great societal and professional change, or rather the need for that change, for a very long time. And we're lucky as we get to hear from her at a time of great reflection. Considering now, after 28 years of running a successful business, what might be next? She's asking the questions, noticing the desire for change and the calling to something else, in inverted commas. And we talk deeply about the challenges that life throws at us, the big decisions and reflective moments, and in such a way that she gives permission for others to live their life in a way that's true and real to them. She's a guide, a motivator, an explorer with so much rich knowledge in how to establish a business that functions for the holistic growth of all involved, employees and employers alike. She reminds us that when you let go of the plan and follow the path, things happen beyond your wildest goal setting. So just try not to feel motivated to take your own next steps after listening to this. I might just have this episode and repeat myself for a little while. One trigger warning, we talk a little bit about death and profound grief. And so if that is a trigger for you, it is perfectly fine to give this one a miss. If you're still with us, I hope you love this chat and the brilliant Mary C Dwyer.
Let me tell you, trying to summarize the woman we're meeting today is no easy feat. Her name is Mary C Dwyer, CEO and founding director of Impact Solutions International, author of the powerful book titled The Final Act of Grace, a moving memoir of marriage, family, business partnership, and the spiritual journey of profound loss and grief, and founder of 100 Women², Women Helping Women, with a vision of 100 women to walk 100 kilometers to raise $100,000 for causes associated with helping women rise. Her work with political, business, and spiritual leaders across the globe is a powerful instrument that's promoting positive, sustainable social development for individuals, companies, and countries. And Mary influences the development of leaders through her IQ plus EQ plus SQ plus SWQ minus ego leadership development model. And for those playing at home, that is intellectual intelligence plus emotional intelligence plus spiritual intelligence plus systems intelligence minus ego, that sneaky little thing that equals wise leadership. And she's worked with leaders from the World Bank, EU, UN, the military, top-level politicians and diplomats, CEOs, boards, exec teams, all the way down to little old me, when I had the pleasure of joining her for a 3-day leadership and development retreat that shook me to the core. Mary's career and personal story, because you can never really separate the two, has legs, twists, turns, and incredible impact. And working with her has been described as doing an emotional intelligence leadership MBA. And just in the short time we've spent together, I can back that entirely. She's a woman who believes loving kindness is a powerful instrument in the transformation of humanity. I can't wait to hear your story, Mary. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I gave some professional context up front there, of course, but let's actually start our chat with some more personal context. Tell me, how would your husband, Chris, describe you?
Quirky. We actually only had this conversation last week. Loving, intelligent, quirky, out there, curious. And the word that we've been using a bit the last week or so was enliven. It's like a real sense of life. And I think, that is coming because I'm just about to be unemployed and I'm afraid. And that has got a real sense of, I haven't been in that space for so long, and it is exciting and it is scary, both of those at the same time. And I almost just can't wait now. And kind.
Enlivened. What a beautiful word.
Yeah. And I haven't felt that for quite a while. Not to the level that I am feeling it now, feeling it at the moment. Your podcast has actually been a big part of that. It's just made me excited about doing what so many of the people that you've spoken to have done, where they've gone, I'm going to jump. I don't know where I'm jumping to and I don't know where I'm going to land, but I'm absolutely going to jump. And that's where I am at this point in time. So perfect time in a way to have this discussion after a 28-year career. And now it's time for me to jump.
We always meet the people we need to at the right time. We hear the stories we need at the right time. So I just feel so privileged to have you on this podcast at the right time. And I mean, I'm just going to cut that little recording out and I'm going to play it to myself every morning. It's going to be just the motivator I need.
I would also say the same. If I think about reciprocity and that we are all connected, and I'm drawing with my hands the infinity loop, one of the bits of advice, if you like, that I give to all CEOs now is that you absolutely need a cohort of younger people around you to be informing you. You do not need to be coached by people who know the world the same way that you do. You need to be coached by people who are seeing it completely differently. And when I was thinking about that, Kim, and thinking about my future, I would absolutely like to stay connected to you. And not in any way as now, because I'm leaving this role as a coach or a mentor, but as I want to have younger, vibrant, intelligent, curious, alive women, mainly, men also, but I'm really focusing on the growth of women at the moment around me in my life. So maybe we might have lots of times that we can have chats.
I think we might have many a chat. In fact, I would just have you on a chat every day if you could work that into your schedule. I think that would be just glorious. I can't wait to see what you do next, but we're going to get into all of that. Before we do though, I'd love to go way back. So before Impact Solutions International and before the Final Act of Grace, before 100 Women Squared, who were you?
Look, I was a nurse. My first career was as a nurse, and I specialised in I've always been drawn to, even as a young nurse, I was drawn to the people who were really experienced great challenge. So, for example, in postgrad I did as a midwife and then palliative care. Even as a midwife, if we were talking about the patients on the ward and there might have been a mum who's just had a stillbirth, for example, or a woman whose baby's died in utero. Even then I found I was the one who'd put up my hand and say, I'll have her, I want her, I'll nurse her. So if I talk about a red thread running through my life, I've always been called to serve those people in incredible grief and pain. But I also grew up in a business family, and I think that gave me a natural inquiry about how to do things better. So I kept on looking at the inefficiency in the hospital system, and this is 35, 40 years ago. And even as a student nurse, 6 weeks in, I made an appointment with a matron called the matrons at the time, in order to go and chat to her about what I saw was wrong in the hospital. So
I love that.
I like now, can you imagine? In fact, who I am now, if that happened to me, I'd be welcoming this person. But in those days, it was like absolutely not the right thing to do. So I think I've always been curious and attracted to being able to sit with the bigger stuff of life.
That red thread makes me think about transitions. You seem to have a natural inclination to be where you need to be at a time of great transition. So I feel that for you in your next stage in your career. But we won't jump ahead too far, because I'm interested in finding out from you what triggered you to move away from nursing at that time.
Again, it was always an interest in business, and I kept on saying to my husband, my late husband Adrian, oh my goodness, if only they would do this, or if they do this. And it's so obvious. To me, it just seemed so obvious. And in the end, it was, well, why don't you do something about it? And so I did. I still stayed nursing, but started Impact Solutions to do what we would now call emotional intelligence. And of course, it wasn't a part of business at all then. So if I look back over the whole of my life, I've often been right on the forefront of trends that were coming. And so we started what we now know as developing the emotional intelligence of leaders way, way, way before it was ever even really talked about. And of course, that was informed by my nursing background and just watching people's inability to be able to work with people well. And then, of course, Daniel Goleman started to write his work, and that legitimatized emotional intelligence for leaders. And we'd already been doing it for about 10 years then. So we had a lot of credibility in the marketplace. And, the rest, they say, is history.
This is a bit of a loaded question, because I had the privilege of hearing a little bit about your story in times gone by, and I'm really fascinated by this part of your story. So around the time, I think it is with nursing ending, maybe Impact Solutions starting to develop, you had another business at that time that presented some challenges.
Okay.
Tell me about that.
So my late husband was a horticulturalist, and actually that was really our very first business. So he went out and we bought a garden business. But the garden business that we bought was, let's just say it wasn't the business that we were presented with. What we bought was really different to what was presented. And within 3 months, we were facing bankruptcy. I was pregnant with my second child. My first child had just been diagnosed as having cerebral palsy. And we came, I think it was $16.80 away from declaring bankruptcy. We said if we got to that point, we would declare bankruptcy. But there was something, we had nothing to lose. And so during that period, we said, okay, let's run this business the way that we'd always wanted to be really cared for as employees. So a lot of our employees then were long-term unemployed people, because we got paid by the government to employ them. We thought that was really good. And we started to work with them on getting their ideas and what would they do, and because they were the people who were doing the work. What was it that we couldn't see that they could see? And it was, in fact, many of their ideas that completely changed that business around. And that taught us, way before it was even a thing, to do a whole system thinking and working with everyone, and community engagement and dialogue and open book. We ran an open book policy. So every single week we would say, okay, this is what we've made, this is what we've lost, these are the expenses. What can you see here that we can't see? And of course that business over a period of time grew. It divided into two. Some of the original employees bought out one half of the business, and that's when we learned about getting a passive income, because they started to pay us over a period of time. So that was our first real business. And then it was like, well, what about if we took this into other businesses? And that, along with emotional intelligence, because even with the long-term unemployed people we were working with, they actually needed self-esteem. That's what they needed more than anything else. So it was, and they were willing to experiment with us, and we were green. I was so green, and it worked, and it flourished. There's a lovely story there of a guy called Mike. He was our very first employee, and when we first interviewed Mike, he had long hair down his back, and he looked pretty scary. I would have absolutely have crossed the other side of the street as a woman if I saw him walking down the street. And we said, and many of our clients were in a really well-established suburb, and we said to Mike, look, we'd love to employ you, but we would really like you to get your hair cut. And we wrestled with, can we ask that? And we said, well, it's his choice. But Mike turned up for work, his first full day of work after a long time of being unemployed, and he completely shaved his head. To number one, got a brand new pair of really dark shades and a new tattoo. And he looked more scary than he'd ever had before. But he was, he was the type of employee that he would go and pick flowers out of the garden for the ladies whose gardens he was caring for, because they couldn't get out in the garden anymore. And he would always include weeds, because he'd say, the weeds are keeping me employed, so here are the roses and they've got some weeds, and he'd knock on the door. And none of that was us. That was him. And the little old ladies ended up loving him because they felt so safe. But he was this beautiful, beautiful, gentle soul. Yeah. And I'll tell one more story about Mike, our very first employee. So we ran, said to Adrian, imagine if we said to them, you could have whatever sick leave you wanted, but you could never lie to us. We knew that sick leave was a real liability. We were such a small business. Every single day was, for a long time, we were struggling to survive every day. And I also said to Adrian, I can remember lying as a nurse at different times to say I was sick when I wasn't. Nowadays you could have a stress day or a mental health day, but in those days there's no way you could. And so we said, okay, you can have whatever sick leave you want, but you can never lie to us. So it was the day before Christmas, or the day before that, I think. Super busy time of year. We were just flat out, and Mike rings really early in the morning and he goes, that policy we've got that we can have a sick day whenever we need one, and we're never to lie to you. And I went, yeah. He said, well, I'm in bed with the most gorgeous girl. And I'm not going to come to work today. I'm going to have a sick day. Isn't that gorgeous? And end up being with her for years. I don't know if he still is. Years and years and years and years. So we learned a lot in that business. Our employees, and imagine this for every single workplace, our employees taught us how to run a really good business.
The magic of being green and not knowing anything, it just breeds so much passion and honest, true work and results that it's just, we're also desperate to learn all the skills, all the structures, how a leader should lead, what it should look like, how do you do organizational development, just so many things. Whereas it's just instincts to go in and say, do you know what, I just don't want to be lied to. But we're humans who need days.
Absolutely. And if the business we'd bought had have been a very successful business right from the very beginning, I dare say I would have got caught in the trap of running a traditional business. So it was actually an incredible gift, even though incredibly painful, that we bought a bum business, because we just learnt so much. And what we really learned was about working with the whole system, working with everyone having a voice. And of course, 28 years later, that's only ever served us well and still influences how, as you've experienced, the type of work that we're still doing in organisations even now. And how time and time again, like even in the organisation where we first got connected, oh my goodness, just put everyone in the room. You want to redesign a business? Just put everyone in a room and just say, how would you redesign it? And get the people who do the work to redesign it. Because, my goodness, they'll come up with a completely different redesign than anyone else. And at the end of the day, it's probably going to be much more effective than people that are redesigning it 3 or 4 steps removed from the actual lived, breathed, everyday work experience of the people that are in the system.
So very, very true. I love that story about your first business. I feel like you've taken a few leaps already at this stage of your journey and learnt quite a few incredible lessons. And it's really fascinating to hear that Impact Solutions is already starting to build underneath this. And What I'm really interested in is, I guess, the next stage, how you went from that business you started to pass away, and Impact Solutions International starts to become a business. It's coming out. What did you do? How did you get it out there? What was that experience like?
In all honesty, a lot of hard work. So I used to work at night as a nurse and then work all day starting to build Impact Solutions International. It wasn't Impact Solutions International at the beginning, it was just Impact Solutions. And we really wanted to do international work, especially around peace work. And I can remember reading Wayne Dyer, one of his books, and he talks about wanting to become an international author. And all he did was start to say that that's what he was. So we actually just added international, changed the business name onto the end of Impact Solutions because we wanted to provide solutions that made an impact. Then we added international, and one day that call just came in.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I don't mean to stop you down on a flow here, but I just there's so much in calling yourself what you want to be, not waiting until you are the thing to then call yourself the thing. I see this with artists I get to speak to, or CEOs, business, but everyone's so nervous to call themselves that thing if they're not there yet. But it's, well, how do you get there? Until you've just become it, you embody it completely. If you want to do it, you just have to go for it. I just love that.
And it worked, and all word of mouth. Nearly all of our work right around the globe has been word of mouth. I find that amazing.
Me too.
So I find that our clients are our marketing. So love your clients and do really good work every single time, that you're working with them. And especially once you work at a particular level. And I think once people know that you'll never share, you'll never divulge what someone's come to you for, you'll never share that, then one leader will talk to another leader who talks to another leader, whether that is at prime ministerial level or whether that's at diplomatic level or whatever level it is, just one speaking to another. So, thank you to every single one of them. And we didn't know that. We did, for 1 year, we looked at where every single one of our clients came from, and 96.2% of all of our revenue had come from our clients speaking about our work. And that's where we stopped all TV advertising, in the day, posters, banners, flyers. Maybe web was around then. Maybe it was the very beginning of webs, very, very early. So we just stopped absolutely everything and said, okay, from now on, we'll really love up our clients. That's where we'll put our marketing dollar into doing that. And yeah, it worked.
I want to go back to that moment that you got the first call from International, from that opportunity. Tell me about that.
Wow, that was a really big day. So Adrian had already been diagnosed. So he was both another director in the business as well as my husband. He'd been diagnosed with cancer at that stage, and we were going away to Pyrmont, driving up the East Coast for a weekend away before he started intensive radiotherapy. And a call came from an ambassador from Sweden, and he'd heard about the fact that I was a businesswoman but also really interested in peace. And they were doing an international gathering in Sweden where they were pulling together leaders from completely different sectors, so whole system thinking, so leaders of, say, might have been education, leaders of health, leaders of the military, all sorts of different leaders to come together in Sweden and have a look at what would happen if you designed an international peace plan with a global perspective from all the different lenses of all those different people. And he wanted a businesswoman or a business person. And I can remember looking at Adrian and going, it's the call, that's Sweden, that's the ambassador of Sweden. We always knew it would come, but here it was. And Adrian just looked at me and said, well, you've got to go. And he's just about to start this intensive radiotherapy. And I just said, I can't go. And he said, but, this is everything we have worked for. He said, if I live, which he had every intention of doing, then you've got to go. This is everything we've worked for. This is the call. And then he said, and if I die, you've got to go. This is everything we've worked for. And with that, not long after that, actually, on a plane to start this amazing 10 years of global work, often with peace at the very core of that. Incredible 10 years, actually, if I think about it.
I can't imagine the overwhelming sensations you would have felt at that time with everything happening all at once. I have read your book in great detail. And when I say I've read it in great detail, I feel like I really labored over every word because it is so incredibly impactful. So I feel like I have a little insight into that stage of your life. And I hugely recommend for anybody. I mean, I don't even know. I just think every single person needs to read this. But if you're ever facing losing a loved one, or as you say, wishing to arrive at our own deaths well prepared and understand a little bit more about our human potential, it's absolutely must be read. And in that book, before we come into that phase of Adrian's journey, you do talk about being in business with Adrian, which put a smile on my face through much of the book, because I loved the way you just described your working relationship and the ups and the downs and the pushing each other. And tell me a little bit about that experience being in business partnership with your husband.
Well, first of all, so I started the business by myself, and then at some point I knew that okay, in order to really grow the business, I really wanted someone who was good at systems and marketing and advertised in the newspaper, as we used to do then, for a business development and marketing manager. And on the day that the applications close, Adrian put in his application.
Did he do an official application?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, bless him.
I know. And he'd been studying business and marketing he nearly finished, I think. And yeah, he was the best applicant. So that was probably, that was a big challenge. It was my business. I didn't want to do it with him. I didn't want to do it with him, but he was absolutely the best applicant. And oh my goodness, there's no way I could have done the business or made it what it was without him, because he had a very good customer service orientation and also really good business systems. So that meant that we could leverage. And without that, I think I would have always struggled to have reproduced the work we did across different people or across different businesses and across different sectors. So it was really Adrian, and he was disciplined, which most people looking at us would have said it was me that was really driven and disciplined, but he was disciplined in a different way. He was disciplined with structure and really disciplined with things like setting up our financial future, for example. So he really took care of all of that side. I would just basically say, how much do we need to turn over? How much do we need to make in the next 3 or 4 months? And he'd give me a figure, and it's like, okay, how are we going to do that? So we were a really, really, really good pair. And of course, for his clients, they didn't know that I existed. And for many of them still, which I really love, Impact Solutions International was Adrian Beardsley. Other people who know me go, oh, Impact Solutions International is or was Mary Dwyer. But actually, I could not have done it without him. And he had an amazing intellect. So he was a member of Mensa. So he had a really brilliant mind, and I would read stuff out to him at night, for example. And then 4 or 5 months later at a dinner party, he would recite that verbatim.
Wow.
Like the beginning of Carl Sagan, or I could just remember thinking, how? How?
I'm so jealous.
I'm so jealous. I would say that I've had an emotional intelligence. He had the intellectual intelligence. So I had probably an emotional and intuitive intelligence. So different intelligences. But I really, really needed his in the business. We would never have got to where we got to without Adrian behind us and me. I would have been too scared to take the jump. It was actually Adrian who always said, sweetheart, give it a go. Give it a go.
And did you guys together work on a formal business plan, or did you tend to use some of that intuitive nature of yourself mixed with his business acumen to build the plan as you go?
Both. So formal business plans and my thinking about this has really changed. So yes, we did have formal business plans, but often it was something that was completely left of centre that would come in and really take the business on another tangent. So the IQ plus EQ, at the very beginning it was IQ plus EQ minus ego. We absolutely knew that we needed to take out ego. But when we kept on looking at trends and what was coming after EQ, and I still think this now, it is, okay, business has to move into a spiritual intelligence. We have to move into an understanding that anything that we do is connected to the rest of the world, that a business cannot operate in isolation from that understanding and be a good global steward. We can't do that. So the SQ, meaning I am in my spirit and I am bringing this to my work. That gives a sense of aliveness and a passion and a drive and a vibrancy that, again, using the word that we started with, enlivens a business. And that in itself becomes a powerful attractor. People want to be around that energy. And then it was Adrian who also said, and we really need a systems-wide intelligence, that any business that operates in, or any leader that operates with a siloed mentality will always produce a lesser result than those leaders that were operating, having a look at both internally what's happening throughout their business, but externally what's happening in global trends. And when you've got that awareness and you're bringing that lens into your business, then the strategic decisions you make are infinitely different. So we did have formal, but we were also always calling in that was meant to be coming through us as well. So that's probably the very beginning of a completely different way of working. But every single part of my life was planned. I used to have it mapped out, laminated, up in the shower. Would read it every single in the shower. Would read it every single morning.
Love that.
You know, financial goals, mental goals, health goals, family goals, business goals, writing the book. In fact, I can pull out those now, and so much of my life I can just go tick, 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 tick. But where it really changed was when Adrian died, because no matter what we wrote or what we did, there was a point in his journey of his death where I went, oh, no matter what we do, this is meant to happen. This is going to happen. This is meant to happen. I think that really changed the way that I saw the world. So there's something there for me now that is, allow me to be such a hollow instrument that the greatest manifestation of what I am capable of doing, allow that to now come and flow through me. Let not my little goals prevent a magnificence that I don't even have comprehension of from coming through me. So that's really different than traditional goal setting. And because if the most amazing thing that I can imagine is so small and tiny in comparison to maybe what I'm really meant to be doing, why I'm really here. So do I still have goals? Yes, I do, but my goals are really different. My goals are much more about, let me completely surrender and be a servant to you. And by you, I mean the universe, the enormous potentiality that exists in the field. So it doesn't matter which way it shows up in my life. So it's no longer about what. It's much more about developing myself so whatever is meant to happen can come through. Does that make sense? It's interesting to articulate this, isn't it? Because it's such a different way of thinking and so different to how I used to think.
There's a moment in the final act of grace which just, I mean, if the tears that it ensues in anybody who experienced this, and it's just such a gift to be able to experience it through the words that you've written. It's a very profound and very moving experience for anybody who reads your story and Adrian's story. And there's a particular moment that I'm reflecting on when you're talking about this experience, and it's after Adrian's death, when you are alone and you start to notice a light that comes into the room rather unexpectedly. And the feeling I got from reading that part of your story, and I don't want to give too much of it away because I really want to encourage the listeners to go and read this book, because we can't do it justice in this forum, but it felt as though there was a real thinning of the sheath between what we know and what is possible and all that there is beyond those limitations. And as his gift to you seems to be that awareness that there is something so much bigger than you've ever imagined. And I wondered if we could reflect on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, let me talk a little bit about that. So because I suppose we've spent all my life in inquiry, you know, who are we? Why are we here? What are we about? What's my purpose? You know, all of those sort of questions. and exploring many, many different religions and a lot of spirituality. And I would now say that I absolutely believe there is something so magnificent, and we are magnificent, but I don't have a name for that. And it definitely doesn't have a religious frame that it sits in. It probably includes all religions, including atheism. So we used to sort of say, look, whoever dies first, if there's any chance that you can come back, come back. And that was sort of like red wine, glib conversations, lots of really good dinner parties, those sorts of chats. And then on the day that Adrian did die, about midnight, finally getting to bed and lying there, and we have been meditators for a long time, finally going into meditation and saying, okay, sweetheart, if you can come. And he came. And I think even to this day, so some nearly 13 years later, even to this day, like the awe and the surprise and the bewilderment and the really, oh my God, like, is that you? Like, oh my God, like, really, that is still with me in the same way that it was there that night. And he appeared on the ceiling as two like luminous balls of light. So often when I'm describing this, I ask, say to someone, look up at a light and then close your eyes. And the afterglow that's left on your retina is a bit like what that looked like. But the two balls of light danced around each other doing the infinity loop. And, it's like, oh my God, are you okay? And it's just these two balls of light just dancing, across on my bedroom ceiling. And then the questions, the dialogue started, and it lasted for 3 days. Every night I'd go to bed with Adrian on the ceiling of my bedroom, and it wasn't, he didn't just come to me. So that's where I'll stop, so you can go and buy the book and have a bit of a read. But in conversation with him, it was as clear as the conversation that you and I are having now. And so I could just say, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about sex? And, because I was brought up as a Catholic, so I really want to know about sex. What about that? What happened after you died? And what was it like? And all of those questions. We just spent hours in communion with each other. And of course, life could never be the same again. So let's bring that back to goals. I could then no longer write a little business plan that said that this is going to happen and then that's going to happen and that's going to happen, because actually I have no idea who we are. Anything that I thought was completely blown out of the water. And even now, after 13 years more of study and reflection and practice and dedication, I am less at a place of knowing than I've ever been, and more in a place of awe and wonder than I've ever been.
It's incredible. Yeah. It just gives me a sense of connectivity, and that's what I mean by the gift of your story. Just that sense of awe and wonder is highly contagious through this experience of just connecting with you now and reading this book. It's absolutely incredible. Mary, how did you evolve through that experience to come back into Impact Solutions International after that? I mean, wow, where do we start?
Well, what a great question. For that, I need to thank a client. He was a coaching client who then became a CEO. And he rang me after about, I don't know how long. I don't know how long, because the business really changed format. And he said, I'd really love you to do a lot of values work in our organisation. And I must actually catch up with him now that I'm just about to finish work. And really, he knows, and I have thanked him. But he said, and you can do it whatever way that you want. And I said, well, let's do it by building an internal team. And those team members, now we can look across the executive level, and there's one, and oh, that one's now a CEO, and that one's a CEO. And, that's beautiful to watch down the years. So it was really him, and also the international work really picked up. So the ambassador from Sweden just said, well, wait, and he did. And of course, as I said, word of mouth that ambassador speaks to another person, which speaks to another person, and hence the work ended up, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Switzerland, France, Sweden, Iceland. Oh, working in Iceland was just amazing. So it's really the word of mouth, and word of mouth is just as important internationally as what it is locally. So I think that really developing those relationships, and as I've already mentioned, being an absolute vault, because we make life so hard for especially people who want to change. You imagine being a politician, for example, and you know that you need to grow and develop. Oh my, the pressure on them. And who do they go to? And if the press picked up that they were coming to do leadership development, imagine the field day that the press might have. So we absolutely need to create a really both safe place that people can come and lean in and grow and develop beyond their limitations that they will inevitably have, because they are human. We're all human. And I think it was that. So we will never say who we've worked with unless that person gives us direct permission to say. And even there's some special work that we do, which is called an executive leadership development program, which is a one-on-one bespoke work that goes over about 6 to 8 months. Everything's individually tailored for those leaders. The only way that we will ever share is that we might ring a leader who's done that work and says, and I might say, this particular leader's in inquiry about that work, would you mind if you speak to them? And we always match. And other than that, we just absolutely promise it's the number one dismissible offence at Impact Solutions International if you break anyone's confidentiality. Because the person who's coming to me and who they're coming at that point in time to do that change work, that person will no longer be that person when they finish the work. It's gone. If I've done my work well, if they've done their work well, they are a different person at the end of that journey. So why would I want to even share with anyone what they came in for? In some ways, it's absolutely irrelevant. I'm much more interested in what's trying to come through, the leader that's trying to come through to them, and let me help and grow and manifest that. And because of that, we work right across the political spectrum. It is in our global interest to grow as many leaders as possible as quickly as we can, and leaders that have got the most highly developed consciousness that is possible, because I think we are in for incredible changes over the next 20 to 30 years, and it's going to require a really different consciousness that's way beyond competition for us to really grow and survive and thrive.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single person who will disagree with you there, and never has there been a greater need to be personally developed to face that challenge. I think you touch on something there that I just find so deeply fascinating, and taking it from a high level C-suite or a politician or somebody in an influential role, all the way down to just the individual, the person who might feel small and insignificant, or like their work isn't yet impacting a lot of people. But even those people sometimes can deal with that pressure of trying to change under what is a huge microscope of life. Every person seems to just know everything about you these days, social network connectivity, and the unfortunate nature of people trying to place each other into these spaces or these expectations, these narratives to sort of understand self and understand each other. It can be such a limiting place to play with change. And what I love about change so much, that's the joy of it, not knowing, putting something out there and going, hey, I'm doing this for a bit, what do you think? There's such a power of vulnerability in that, and getting comfortable with that is such a huge challenge that holds so many great leaders back, and so many leaders in any sense, not necessarily leading organizations or brands or businesses or anything like that, just being a person who leads from trusting themselves and shows others the way to great change and to great fulfillment and enlivenedness, if I can make that into a word. I just think, yeah, we're doing it. I just think that's so interesting to think about in that context, that we all deserve to change and we can do it.
And, we talk about leadership, but for me now too, it is as important whether you are leading yourself as it is leading a country. And where my thinking is now, and it may not be right, I'm just on this journey with everyone else, and I've no way is my life perfect. Especially if you look at some of the really recent Instagram postings that I've done, where I'm really talking about just how messed up I am, and how my relationships, even with my immediate family, aren't all good in any way. But I actually think there is as much value in you just working on yourself as it is in you doing anything else. If we all just did that, then we wouldn't have Ukraine. We wouldn't have murder. We wouldn't have the abuse of anyone. We wouldn't have homelessness. We wouldn't have thousands of people starving in Bangladesh or Pakistan at the moment because of the floods. We wouldn't have Lismore the way that it is. We wouldn't allow that to happen, because when you really understand that we're so connected, it cannot be happening to another human being without it happening to you anyway. So therefore, I think there is as much value in being a contemplative and really giving your life to that as it is in, I don't know, leading a country. And if a country leader comes to me because they want to do better, then let me be of service to them, because working with one who affects the lives of many is strategically really smart too.
There's one thing you touched on earlier that I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about, and I think it links beautifully as to what we were just talking about in personal development and the amount of love for yourself that requires to start to really investigate who you are and how to bring out the best of yourself that's already there. And you talked about meditation being a huge part of your life. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about your journey into meditation, what it's delivered for you, what types of meditation you do, as much as you'd like to share. I just find it such a deep and fascinating topic.
Sure. So I've just played around with meditation for a long time, and probably very, very early days introduced into meditation through the writings of Louise Hay. And this is way back when I was a student nurse, and we were taught that there is no relationship between the mind and the body at all, none. And that was formally taught to us. And then Louise Hay bought a book, I think it was Love Your Disease, It's Keeping You Healthy, or wrote one of her very first books that started to talk about the relationship between the mind and the body. And of course, we now know so much more about that. So we started to play around with meditation, but what really fascinated me was the very first time I was at a leadership retreat in Melbourne, just at a normal leadership retreat. But in this leadership retreat, they said the head of the Brahma Kumaris, which is a spiritual order, is in residence, and she will give 10 minutes to any leader who would like to meet her. And I remember going, okay, well, if it was the Dalai Lama, I'd say yes. I had never heard of the Brahma Kumaris. If it was the Pope, I'd say yes. So I said yes, I'd go and meet her. So I went in, we had 10 minutes. She was quite old, very old, 90s, all dressed in white, long, big plait down her back, but sitting cross-legged. And she had earpods in, listening to music, and that really threw me. I was like, oh, okay. And she pulled them out and she said, are you sleeping well? I remember yes, and I noted that. Here's a head of a world order. First thing she says to me is, are you sleeping well? Do you like the food? So grounded, so simple. And then she popped the earpods back in, and then she pulled them out and she said, oh, you do know why you're here, don't you? And I can remember thinking, well, no, not really. And she said, it's time for you to come home. Then she went, oh, you do know where your home is, don't you? And I can remember going, I don't think I meant to say Hobart. And she said, it's Rajasthan. It's time for you to come home. But 6 weeks before that, I'd had one of those waking dreams. So we wake up in the middle of the night and I dreamt that I was in Rajasthan, to the point where I'd woken Adrian up and told him about this. I've written about it in my diary, this waking dream, this huge dream. So I just said, okay, I'll go. So 6 weeks later, I found myself at an international leadership conference in Rajasthan, and I watched this woman called Daddy Jenki change people by her presence. So I'm a pretty hardcore businesswoman. At this stage we're winning Telstra Business of the Year, Businesswoman of the Year runner-up. We were literally going after and focusing on winning awards like that, because it really helped leverage our credibility, especially when we're talking about emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence in leadership. So there was a part of the planned business strategy. But I'm sitting there going, oh my God, look at this woman. What is it about her that I am witnessing people changing just by being around her? And all of this is meant to be voluntary. So where are they getting the funding from? What is that? Wow, that's a pretty cool business model. that I can see. She's not paying in all of these people. They're all volunteering. And she's doing transformational change by how much presence she's got. And Peter Senge had just started, I think he might have just released his first book called Presence at the time. So that it was just starting to come into the very outskirts of business and organisational transformation. And of course, meditation is a really, really key practice of the Brahma Kumaris. And I started to meditate. And at that time, Adrian wasn't diagnosed, but our marriage was really in trouble. I was at that point where I think we were both looking at each other going, oh, another 28 years? Do I want to do that with you? And I'm sort of thinking, oh, you're a bit fat, and we were grungy at times, and we were really working hard, and I don't know, I think we were both circling each other going, do we want to commit? Because it was a bit like he was 50 or nearly 50 and I was 48-ish back then. Do we really want to recommit and go for the long haul, or do we want to go, oh, that was amazing, thank you very much, and what else is there, or who else is there? But during that week, I decided to turn back emotionally, mentally, spiritually into my marriage and give it a really good year. And meditation was really key in that. And it gave it such a peace. And Adrian started to meditate as well. And then during that year, he was diagnosed. So we would not have got through that year without meditation for both of us. And he would not have died the way that he died without being such a, by then we were pretty disciplined meditators. It would not have happened. There is a informed grace that comes through meditation that I cannot find any other way. And I talk about it like it melts for me. If I think about ice in water, you can't see ice melting, but you go to pick up your glass and suddenly there's no ice in there. And that's what meditation does to a lot of the bits of life, I think. It just sort of melts them. They can't hold their form. And meditation also helps shine a light on ego in a way that I don't think anything else does. When you are in the grace that comes with meditation, I think it allows me to see all of my shadow bits. It shines a light on the shadow bits. And if I can't see those, I'm not even aware of my ego a lot of the time. And a lot of the time I do not like what I find. But also within meditation, it makes that okay too. That is a part of all that is. Even just seeing it and shining a light on it makes it disappear from the shadow. At least then it's basked in light. And just much more recently, I'm really playing with much more consciously travelling through the different layers of consciousness to hang out in, and maybe it's just an imaginary world, but hang out in a world where there is absolutely no separation, where it's a bit like my being of light is a part of the light of everything that is, that exists in absolutely everything. And I want to spend a lot more time, and I don't have the luxury. I want to stop being pulled back into having to deal with PAYG, for example, or I just want that to stop. I want to hang out there a lot more, but why I'm living as a human being.
I love that. I mean, yes, just the disparity between the connectivity and PAYG, it can't help but make me laugh.
Yeah, that's like, because that is the reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Oh,
and we
dear.
all do have that reality and that space that we have to do. But in terms of showing up as a different person for that reality, or allowing a sense of pause, that I really hear from what you were sharing is that meditation gives you that brief moment of pause before going into anything, and just that back to self, always coming back to self. And I think throughout everything that you've shared today, there's a real red thread of courage to throw yourself into the office of your senior back in your nursing days, 6 weeks in, to say, excuse me, can we talk about how rubbish this is and how I can fix it?
That's right. I actually remember what I went for. One of the lectures we had was on using deodorant. And it was, you're training us to be professional nurses, and they were really trying to lift nursing into being a profession. And here we get a lecture, precious time, on using deodorant. That's what I went to complain about.
Good on you. You do have a real sense of innate courage that you are capable, or you are destined, or just that there's more for you to give. No matter what you're doing, there's just more, there's more, there's more. And I think that's a really unique quality that I spend a lot of time thinking about in the forum of this podcast, and the really courageous people I get to speak to every day, and all of those people who might listen and say, oh, I think I want to try something else, and I don't know what it is yet. Even that little sense of I want something more takes huge courage to look at. Do you think that there's anything that you do or that anybody else could do that just makes that courage get a little bit bigger, just so that you can go into the change space?
I love that as a question. And the first thing that came to mind was hearing my father's voice when I talked about some of the injustices I saw as a young nurse, and my father saying, well, what are you going to do about it, Missy? And that's probably still there.
Missy.
Yeah, what are you going to do about it, Missy? And if I think about, and that definitely was a part of 100 Women Squared, but for all of those people that are thinking about taking the next step or wondering, I just said, take a step and then take another step and then take another step. Because if anyone had have said, when we started Impact Solutions International, one day in, I think it's been 28 years of running the business, in 28 years' time, you would have worked, here and there, and worked with these countries and worked with armed groups and worked with terrorist groups to help them rebrand and come back into civil society. And you would have worked, transforming that organisation and this, and worked with these amazing leaders from around the world, and also people that I've gone to learn under too. I would have just gone, oh my God, no way. But actually all I did was one day register a business name and then start to talk about the type of workplaces that I really wanted to see and how would we make those, and also started to talk about what was interesting me, what are emotions and how do we work with those. And that, of course, is that first bit of emotional intelligence. So just take the next step, and you wouldn't have the thought, and especially if it's a persistent thought, unless it was for a reason. What if that was your higher self or the universe or God or the goddess or whatever you want to call it? What if that was saying to you, come on, sweetheart, come on, Kim, do it. Like you've got a voice. You're here for another reason. You're here for a bigger reason. You're here to help inspire and call people to be more through these podcasts. Do it. Just do it, and then do the next one. And one day you will end up when you've got 30 or whatever. So just take a step.
Gosh, I love that. Mary, what is your next step going to be?
Oh.
Your little baby one. Doesn't have to be a big one.
No, it doesn't have to be a big one. Okay. I know I've put into the cosmos that I am going to paint a really, 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 really good painting, one day. So I've been painting now since Adrian died, about 10 years. And only last week I sold my very first painting.
Oh, congratulations.
For $350 at the local Rotary art show.
It's beautiful. I love that.
And I would say I'm just starting to understand the medium of oils. And I think a really beautiful painting actually captures something about the divine. And it might take me another 10 years, but one day I'll do that. But in the meantime, there's something there about the journey. So my next step is to keep on letting go of any stuff that stops the divine from coming through more wholly. And whether that be work just filling up the space where you don't have time to dedicate, or whatever that is, whether that is working more on ego, or whether that is exploring more the theory that every single thing is connected, every single thought that we have has an emotional resonance that goes out there and creates the collective consciousness. That's exploring all of that is what I want to do next. I want to manifest the divine fully within my own life. And how that might turn up, I have no idea. But I sure as hell would like to call her in and nurture that a lot more.
Oh, when you call her in, can you give her my number? Because that just sounds like a place I want to live. That is beautiful.
And I really want to let people know that my life is very ordinary. It's magnificent and it's ordinary. And I'm learning and growing, and I fall over all the time. And I've learned heaps in my life, and I struggle with just sometimes my meanness. All of that is still me as well. I in no way have got this together. Because if we are all connected, then unless the whole world is completely together, then I'm not together anyway. And I am beautiful. And I do love myself now. And there's a little part of me that still wrestles with that, but actually I do. So I suppose I sort of want to say it's no way perfect. And especially for those who know me, will go, absolutely.
I think it's just so important to constantly remind ourselves and each other of that. When you see anything that looks like it's together, together isn't, as a concept, isn't possible without the opposite.
Absolutely.
Just like anything, joy isn't possible without understanding profound sadness. And I mean, there's just so many examples of not being able to have the light without the dark, that we have to just be a little bit more comfortable with putting the mess out there in the world.
That's one of the dangers of social media, actually, because their lives are so beautifully curated. We're getting more mature and we're getting better at showing our mess as well as the beautiful side. And I think the mess is also necessary for the beautiful to come through. So if I was thinking about one other thing that I would say to people is stay in your own lane. There is no other person on the whole planet who's constituted in your form. The billions and billions of cells that have come together in a particular way, resonating the way that you are, no one else can do you. Stay in your own. Just don't compare. The moment we compare, we'll always find people that are better than us and always find people that are less, and either way we feed our ego. So just do you.
There's something about talking to you, Mary, and I think I said this very early in our meeting, and our very first meeting potentially, but you make me feel like there is infinite possibility and that there is just more to self, and there is more possibility than is ever imaginable or explainable in a perfect narrative, which is something that I try to do a lot of. Define it perfectly, explain it perfectly. So you make me feel like there is just so much possibility. And so I'm just hugely grateful to you for sharing a small part of yourself and your day with me today, and the listeners as well. It's such a beautiful gift. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
May I ask you one more question
Sure.
before we finish up? How can the listener and I support you on your journey?
Wow. If everything that I've learned is that the more that we can stay in loving kindness, the more that I see people transform. And I think this was most profound for me when I was sitting across from a man who had killed people. He'd been in armed conflict and was actually the leader of an armed group. And I think when he sort of coming out of that period and at the shame of the horror of what he'd done to other people, what he'd witnessed, what he'd experienced himself, and also what he'd done. And in that moment, me just going, I know that I would kill. I know that I could kill. I know that, especially when my children were little, I know as a mother what I would have done to protect them. So I cannot do anything. I can't understand your experience even, but I can right here in this moment profoundly love you for your shame and love you for what you've been doing, what you've tried to do in that moment. And watching this man, almost watching his whole being just collapse, all of the armor collapse, all of the defense collapse, and watch him in his beauty he must have forgiven himself in that moment, I think, because in his beauty of a man who was now forgiven, and that was the power of love in that moment, because I knew there was nothing I could say or nothing I could do but to be in love, to send him love. So the best thing that you can do to support me is to go on that journey of self-love with yourself, because if we all did that, we would just be so different as a planet collectively. And if I think about the future of our planet, then unless we go to love for each other and love for our planet, then we might not get through this period that's coming. And buy the book. And have a look at the Instagram post. And share this podcast of Kim's with as many people as possible. That would be really lovely.
Thank you, Mary. You always make me think deeply and laugh constantly. So thank you for that. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you today and have a little bit of your very special energy and share this story today. So thank you for spending time with me.
A pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you liked the episode and are keen to hear more, please hit the follow button and leave a review. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram @unemployedandafraid, where there's more goodies and links to today's show notes. See you there.